All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're really excited to have you. It's nice seeing some familiar names and faces, I guess, as y'all trickle in. Since we're a little after 5 already, I think I'll just jump right in. We just ask that you, for those attending, we ask that you keep yourselves on mute for the time being, just so that we don't get any feedback noise. We are recording this so that it can live on the LSAC website. LSAC standing for the Louisiana Small Scale Agriculture Coalition. So the group responsible for putting on the climate convening each year. And as many of you know, uh, we had to cancel the climate convening this year midway because the climate showed up too hard. So this is our pivot. We are trying to move all of our sessions to virtual, and this is the first one of the series. So we are really excited today to have Angie Comeaux and Nick Rajen, who were at the first climate convening as well. So we had them so popular, we had them back for round two. And they are going to talk to us a little bit about traditional ecological knowledge. They are both Indigenous land stewards living in different parts of the country, and we're just really excited that they were down to do this pivot with us and share what they know. So I'm going to kick it to both of you, Nick and Angie, to introduce yourselves and jump into the presentation, and just let me know when I can click through to the next slides.
Super awesome. Thank you so much, Maggie. Hey, everybody. It's so awesome to see everybody. I'm Angie Comeaux. I have helped out with both climate convenings over the last 2 years. I'm Muskogee, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Cajun French, originally from Louisiana, and I'm now living in Alabama and stewarding Hummingbird Springs Farm. And I'll go ahead and kick it over to Nick.
Yeah, Yacht A, everybody. Today, Nicholas Rajen, Kiani Ishli. Very happy to be joining you and very happy to be a colleague with Angie as well. I'm enrolled in Navajo Nation and I live in California currently with my family. You're catching me on the last leg of our vacations. We had a little transit changes, but coming from Salinas all the way back to Inland Empire, where we currently reside. But ancestrally, my family, we did a lot of sheep and corn, beans, squash, also peaches, lots of orchards on Navajo Nation. And it's really good, not only reconnecting with that, but also connecting with people all around the continent because these food systems are not just the food that we produce, but also the food and resources that we trade. It's really interesting and really excited to share it along with Angie. Yeah.
So I guess we're going to go ahead and just jump right in since we're already running a little bit behind. And sorry about that. We were trying to figure out some technical stuff. It's a little tricky sometimes. So yeah, we already introduced ourselves, and we're gonna to this evening we're gonna talk to you guys about traditional ecological knowledge. Um, and Maggie, if you want to click through to the next slide.
Nice. So yeah, TEK, I really love the term because it really connects people and societies to the place where you learn about the different functions of the earth. I also really enjoy the term indigenous science as well. These are just knowledge systems that have been built for thousands of years. A lot of them can be empirical in nature and always an observance of the ecology and environment all that surrounds us. This will exist anywhere on the planet. It could be in India, it could be in Germany, and we're going to be focusing, of course, on the Americas. A really great example that I love sharing, and that was shared with me a couple of years ago, is the term of like water birds and thunderbirds, not just like the mythical creature, but a lot of Native American people. We timed when we would plant our corn based on when certain birds and parrots would arrive um, in our pueblos or in our towns or in our regions. Like there's a white parrot that would always fly ahead of the rain clouds, so you know that rain is going to be coming, and it's a really good time to work in your fields, start planting some seeds, such like that. Just amazing, these different concepts and different relationships that you're able to work with, live with, and then also understand in order to work with the systems and harmonies of Earth. Another really great one that I've learned recently comes from pruning, and this is like TEK, all the way from the Mediterranean. I learned this from a great friend, but a lot of people who tend olive orchards and trees for hundreds of years, for millennia, the best way to prune is to actually open up the space of the tree so that a bird can land on every branch. And that's a form of TEK that you don't just wake up one morning and realize. It's something that you kind of pull together over lots of observation and time farming as well. So that's the best way that we can kick this off, I think. Angie, feel free to add anything else in here, but we might be good to go to the next slide.
Yeah, we can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so the first few slides, we're going to give you guys some examples of traditional ecological knowledge. One of my favorite examples is what is called the La Milpa system, or that's the original idea around it. A lot of people have also heard of like Three Sisters or companion planting or intercropping. There's also silvopasture. There's a lot of different words and names for this type of agricultural system. So corn was selectively bred by Mesoamericans for milpa agriculture. And that was to have strong stems to support climbing beans and allowing them to access light. These beans improve the soil health by fixing nitrogen levels, which is an essential plant nutrient. The large sprawling leaves of the squash shaded the soil. It reduced moisture loss and prevented weed growth. And it also dissuaded insects and grazers from walking or trampling and eating from the companion plants. Flowers that were also introduced into that system attracted insects and birds, which helped in pollination and to fight insects. And so those three plants in and of itself, the corn, beans, and squash of the Three Sisters system, some folks would add like a fourth, fifth, sixth. Some of the beds that we have at our farm even have 7, 8 or more plants within that system. Together, the harvest provides all of the food groups and vitamins needed for a healthy human diet, and it's a nutritional lifeline for local and indigenous communities. Also, those plants together, singly, they all provide nutrients as well, but together, it's like a symbiotic relationship where each plant actually helps to perform multiple functions to help the other plants in that system grow better together. An important part of the system that is often neglected by permaculture enthusiasts entails a rotation of annual crops with a series of managed and enriched intermediate stages of short-term perennial shrubs and trees. So that includes what some people would call a food forest. And that culminates in the reestablishment of mature closed forest on a once cultivated parcel over time. That cycle also involves 2 years of cultivation and 8 years of fallow or secondary growth to allow for a natural regeneration of vegetation. That's followed by a slash and burning prior to recultivation. And as long as that system is used where you plant in one space for a certain period of time, you allow those trees and shrubs to grow. And then you allow it to lay fallow and then slash and burn. That system can be sustained indefinitely because that whole cycle, including the burning, which is integral to a lot of these systems, can sustain a healthy soil microbiome and ecosystem. Next.
Yeah, so expanding on the food forest, this is a really incredible concept. It really hasn't been embraced fully, I would say, at least by mainstream hegemonic agricultural practices. Also, just to side note, you might be hearing my poor youngest daughter doesn't like being in a car seat, so you might be hearing her, and then also you might hear some directions from time to time. But The food forest concept can also be extended to food deserts. I'm not a fan of the USDA concept of food desert because being from New Mexico, being from the Four Corners, having worked with a lot of people from Kauai, from Kumeyaay, from these other deserts of the United States, food deserts are abundant with food. Like there's nopales, there's animals, there's always some sort of plant food source that's growing around you. So it can be coming from the forest, from the desert, from the tundra. All these different systems provide bounties of food, and rather than that concept of natives living hand to mouth, they would be cultivated in very unique and special ways. This cultivation could include acts of pruning, it could be intentional seeding, reseeding, different hunting patterns. And one really big one is the intentional use of fire, cultural burning as well. There's a lot of really great examples. Angie, if you don't mind sharing them, I'll just share a little bit more from this slide. An example of food forest here in California, where I'm passing by right now, would be the oaks. There's millions and millions of oaks that have existed, and they produce acorns. And those acorns provided a fantastic base of nutrition for Kauai, for Tongva, for so many different native tribes from these lands. And you even see it in the place names, like there's Encino Hills, that means oak in Spanish. There's also Thousand Oaks, tons of places that recognize this oak presence. And it's not only through the nature of it being there, it's through the intentional relationship with these oak forests that Native people would have from this region. And when you go further east into the deserts, mesquite starts to become predominant. So there's mesquite ecosystems, mesquite forests, and those were functional uh, food forests as well. And one amazing example of them being used by Korea people, by Chemwevi Paiute people, um, Serrano people as well, is that a family could go into the mesquite forest, and over a period of about 3 weeks, they'd be able to gather enough mesquite beans and also process them and have enough food for the entire year. Any of that excess mesquite that they'd have as well, they'd be able to trade it with their neighbors, with family, with people who might have more oak from acorn um, food sources, and then also trading all just all over. So it's pretty amazing to consider. Um, so yeah, Angie, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about the British Columbia and the other sources in here, because it is pretty incredible. These are really ancient food systems as well. They're not just 300, 500 years old. They go back thousands and thousands of years, 10,000, 20,000, 60,000, and even more. So yeah.
Yeah, so what Nick is referring to also, where he asked me to share a little more, the photos in this slide, one on the left is the Amazonian rainforest, and one on the right is actually a site in British Columbia. I'll dive a little bit more because I have a lot. I can talk days and days about this. So I actually am developed a food forest in Alabama. But scientists have known for a number of years that the rainforests were actually cultivated food forests once they started to look at the soil content. Because normally forest soil are not very rich. They become rich over time because of organic material that is deposited by the trees. But without those trees in place, that soil is actually not very rich. And so looking at rainforest soil samples, they were able to see what they call is terra preta. And Nick can tell you a little bit more about that, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. But that is where you can see that they've actually done studies on polyculture agroforestry, and they can see by that there's charcoal, pollen, plant remains, as well as pottery and different things that were added to the soil to help enrich it. And they've also found on the right, this is a photo of its indigenous village in British Columbia. And that's a starkly different reality in what you think of like as a rainforest, where there's like a superabundance of like, as in this photo, plantains, coconuts, different like tropical plant systems. So they found that a site in an indigenous village in British Columbia that it was forcibly emptied in the 1800s. And it was actually ripe with traditional foods like hazelnuts, crab apples, cranberries, hawthorns. And a study by a historical ecologist revealed that there were isolated patches of fruit trees and berry bushes in the region's hemlock and cedar forest. And those were deliberately planted by the indigenous peoples in British Columbia in and around their settlements hundreds of years ago. And it was one of the first times that a forest garden was identified outside of the tropics. And it showed that people were capable of changing forest in a long-lasting and productive way. Ecologists had argued that the biodiversity were accidental and it was just a byproduct of fires and etc. However, without constant maintenance, the natural forest would have quickly taken back over to that hemlock and cedar forest. So those berries and other food-bearing plants were intentionally placed there and maintained for centuries. So I just thought that was an interesting tidbit that they're actually starting to find evidence of food forests and intentional agroforestry all across Turtle Island. So next slide. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into fire adapted independent ecosystems. This is a topic that both me and Nick love. So indigenous people across Turtle Island practice regular cultural burns to manage agriculture, forest, and grasslands. The management of fuels, they manage the fuels so that they didn't build up to unsafe levels to cause the massive wildfires that you see out along the West Coast. It also helped to manage pests and microorganisms through smoke and the heating of the top layers of soil. It also helped to manage food, medicine, and fiber plants. Many native species are fire adapted, and some native seeds can only germinate with fire or with smoke. Examples of that are coastal redwood, longleaf pine, giant sequoia trees, Venus flytraps, and many of the blue stem grasses, echinacea, are some of the examples that are native to the Southeast. Light burning stimulates plant growth. It clears underforests and facilitates hunting as well. These practices, unfortunately, have suffered due to colonization and poor non-native environmental management systems. There is a tree ring expert out of the University of Arizona. His name is Dr. Thomas Swetnam. He has been studying the fire-adapted species of the Southwest. And through tree ring analysis, he was able to see that thousands of tree sections showed that how often fires had burned in the Southwest. And it looked like it was every 5 or 10 years mostly, and it was small fires that consumed grass and shrubs and small seedlings. But those fires also left the big ponderosa ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees. They were able to grow perfectly fine without being devastated by those fires. And that was the norm. And then suddenly around 1890 or 1900 from that tree ring analysis, that type of management of those systems stopped suddenly. And they call that the Smokey Bear effect. Because and the USDA Forestry Service then developed a long-standing policy of aggressive wildfire suppression, and that has continued to decline forest health and increase in fuel loads today. So cultural burns, which is a burning, like a prescribed burning, but it's done for cultural reasons throughout a lot of cultures, indigenous cultures. It also includes burning of plant fuels for processing and cooking food. So, for example, smoking salmon, even in the Aleutian Islands that has little or no trees, would require the burning of extensive amounts of brush through traditional management to smoke their foods. And without people burning, caribou and other herbivores like porcupines and other animals it would eat young vegetation and seedlings, and then plants would overgrow and continue to provide overgrowth of fuel for these dangerous wildfires. Next slide.
Yeah, so just to continue on the description of cultural burning, I've been very privileged and also blessed to I've joined several tribes on cultural and prescribed burns out here in California, and you kind of develop a kind of fire sense as well. You see that burn suppression that is just prevalent throughout our society is very extensive, where people are just afraid of any fire at all, whereas fires would be viewed more as something like water, just like the rains. A soft, gentle rain, the rains that come at the end of a drought period are just magnificent for our farming, for our lands and our environment. And it's the exact same thing with fire. A gentle burn will release all these different nutrients, and it will also um, give that kind of benefit to the environment as well that Angie was pointing out. And this schematic is just fantastic. It shows the kind of model of what agriculture was looking like at least 500 to 1,000 years ago, before we really started to get impacted by disease and then by genocide and by the current state of development and society that we live in today. So that bottom panel is really showing a mixture of both quote unquote conventional agriculture, where you're intentionally planting seeds like corn, squash, beans, tomatoes, chilies in order to sustain your communities, but then also mixing it in with these agroforestry principles, that extended MILPA system. And you can see that it's maintaining a healthy, robust environment. It's also assisting with just really great attainment of foods, from proteins to the carbs and nutritious foods that are coming from your farming system, and from the medicines as well that will be in your environment, surrounding environment. And starting around 500 to 400 years ago, that's where we're getting impacts from colonization, especially from disease. The ability to rely on these systems of agriculture, of deliberate planting, and then also the trading and exchange of food, start to kind of like diminish, at least in the West, or especially in California and Nevada, with a lot of Paiute and native peoples from here, and kind of a reliance on agroforestry and subsistence starts to take place. And then you see where we live today, where all these fertile lands for agriculture are completely developed, and then people are no longer managing the ecosystems where a lot of trees and a lot of management is taking place for thousands of years, resulting in these tinderboxes and resultant conflagrations. It gets pretty intense and really crazy. I'll just share too that one method of the food for Angie, I'm not sure if we have more of that information coming up. Peaches are not a native fruit to the Americas, to Turtle Island, but when they were introduced, especially first in Florida and then also throughout central Mexico, as it made its way up northward, people were able to cultivate the tree and the for millions of peach trees throughout the East Coast, and then also throughout regions like Navajo Nation. Paiute peaches are incredibly delicious. And you see, once people were removed from the East Coast, from Georgia, from South Carolina, from all of that area, the colonizers and settlers, they would continue to try to plant peaches, but very rapidly they would be decimated by different insects and by different diseases that were being managed by native people through intentional burning, through the creation of terra preta like substances and fertile composts like that. So even to this day, you can't get a Georgia peach without using tons of pesticides and herbicides. Whereas I think like with land back and also through different indigenous methodologies, we'd be able to have these extensive peach orchards again, because they're utilizing a level of science that isn't being fully recognized or fully understood by these hegemonic systems and principles as well. So, yeah. Next slide might be good to switch to.
Nick, I got you down for this one too.
Nice, yes. So in addition to fire, we can consider how water was managed. Again, you come to this really racist connotation that Native Americans, we were, again, not managing any of these resources. We were living hand to mouth. Any water that was coming was just through pure luck and through like superstitious rain dances. the reality is that we are making irrigation ditches. We are impacting these riverways, riparian systems very deliberately and then also very impactfully as well. There's incredible research and study that's been done by Paiute people, especially around Bishop Paiute in California, and the other surrounding Paiute communities there, where it shows that there was intentional irrigation ditches that were created, and they were managed in such a way that they would bring water from these riparian systems, from these different events from the mountain, in order to first irrigate their food crop, and then runoff would then go for the surrounding food area, and then again the water would be able to extend out into the wildland areas as well. And this practice from Canada down into Mexico. This was practiced all along the Colorado River, all along all these other important agricultural river systems, and it's every single one of these river systems in Turtle Island. It's just really important to keep that in mind as well. There's a lot of intentionality and also engineering and ecological engineering that's taking place with all our natural resources. Next slide. And yeah, the one map shows the Paiute homeland range, and the other map is showing GIS layers for how they work. Yeah.
So another example, this one is really fascinating to me. Another example is seed microbiomes. So there's a quote from Arthur C. Parker on the Iroquois Nation and how they were performing agriculture, was while the ground is being prepared for sowing, the seed corn is soaked in warm or in a decoction made of herbal boar root and some other herb which the author has not identified. These roots are said to be a medicine for the corn, but in reality, the medicine is a poison for crows and other pests when may eat the corn. And again, this was a quote from someone that was observing the Iroquois and how they performed agriculture. So, inoculation of seed biomes is an adaptation of a Native American agri-science or root tea methods to inoculate seeds with indigenous microorganisms from their wild and invasive neighbors. Dr. James White, which is a Rutgers University professor and a mycologist, has conducted lab and field research of soaking seeds in warm water with what they call weed roots, and effective microbiomes from compost or vermicast tea. This soak supports seed IMOs, which again is the indigenous microorganisms. So it supports those microorganisms and inoculates the seeds with beneficial microbes, endophytes, and compounds that are evolutionary compatible to break down nutrients from minerals and other seed biology in the growing environment. So much like human mammals and our babies are marked with differences in health and health outcomes when the babies are exposed or excluded from the parent microbiome, many indigenous seed keepers talk about the practice of placing the seeds in their mouth or in a pouch with urine prior to planting. Chemicals that are used to sterilize the seed microbiome include highly toxic nicotinoids to control seed and soil microbiota, whereas regenerative practices and research will bioinoculate seeds with vermicast or compost mixes instead of sterilizing them. Because if seeds are born with a microbiome, they're adapted by their parents, and that adaptation is present in the growing of the seed and then the plant. And so if we introduce ways that our genetics are included in that seed, it actually comes back to us in our bodies when we take in those nutrients. And that just like blows my mind. I don't know about you guys. So yeah. Next slide.
Yeah. This one is really fun just in terms of the seed microbiomes. I've been able to play around with it the last couple of years, and this year I got it down pretty good with like taking weeds from the plot that I grow at, masticating them or just like cutting them all up, putting them in some water, and then putting the seeds that I was going to plant into that mix. And I got incredible radishes out of it. I have other plants that are growing from it too. So it's just really, really amazing and really, really interesting research that's going into it all around. But yeah, overall, like these benefits of utilizing these TEK practices, they're more than just extensive. They're world changing. When we look at anywhere in the United States, anywhere in any of these countries throughout Turtle Island, we're living and sitting on these thousands and thousands of year old food systems. And rather than continuing on this kind of practice of like, oh, we know what's best, we're going to plant all the cotton and get all the money that we can from the land, why not tap into these food systems that already exist here? Because they're beneficial for ourselves in terms of nutrition, they're beneficial for ourselves in terms of ways of life, and then also for the surrounding environment. It becomes quite incredible when you consider it. And there's that pain of sadness as well when you're living somewhere that used to have an old growth forest that was just thousands and thousands of square miles, huge, really big, and it was all cut down for logging. Or like you consider species like the native bamboos. I was mind blown to learn like, oh, America has native bamboos, and from that original extensive stands of bamboo that we had from the East Coast all the way into New Mexico, different pockets along into the West Coast, we now only have 2% of that of those native bamboos that are still standing, and they were all ripped up for cotton agriculture. They were all ripped up by pigs and by other domestic animals because it was a nuisance to the non-natives without understanding that, oh, these stands played a role in the food system. They played a role in the environment. Those native bamboo stands were feasted on by bison, by buffalo, by deer, by moose, by all sorts of creatures and animals that just go into making for a healthier community and healthier planet. So by utilizing these practices, we can have a much healthier environment, because like if you use those root teas, you can minimize or even eliminate the need for pesticides and for herbicides. Therefore, you're no longer poisoning the earth that we're trying to eat from. We're able to have robust communities of insects, of microbiota, so that we're no longer plagued by like super viruses or the need to like keep on upping this game of herbicide resistance, of vaccine resistance, of all sorts of things going on with our own bodies and our own health and our own plant health from our communities and agricultural systems. And it just is mind blowing. Another example here that I want to share is like with coffee and with chocolate. Native chocolate production is so incredible. Native chocolate is amazing. If you're ever able to try it, it's just revelatory itself. But Hershey's came in and they tried to do an agricultural test between their these chocolate beans all in full sun, and they concluded that, oh, our chocolate produces 5 times more yield than the native variety. Hershey's doesn't understand that you need an active canopy overstory over the chocolate in order for it to be very productive. So once you actually give the proper conditions for that chocolate to grow in the way that it's been cultivated, one, for thousands of years, and then two, for the millions of years that it's existed on the planet, the native variety actually outperforms the Hershey's variety in terms of yield, but then also in terms of taste and nutrition and all these other markers. And when you have that healthy overstory, now you have good habitat for birds and for other creatures. And those birds, they're not just there in Mexico, they're not just there in South America. They migrate all the way to Washington, D.C., to the bosque and the forests in New Mexico. They're traveling all over the earth. So it becomes very prevalent really quickly that we need to use these practices just for the overall health and well-being for everybody on this planet. So yeah, can obviously go on, but good to go to the next slide.
So ways that traditional ecological knowledge can benefit our current agricultural practices. In short, it can help increase water efficiency, drought resiliency, can slow the water cycle. We can build soil and soil health. Healthy soil microbes and soil biomes can translate to healthy gut biomes in the people who are actually eating the food that soil produces. We'll have reduction in soil loss and erosion. It can help eliminate climate change impacts and sequester carbon in the soil and improve sustainability of our practices. Next slide.
So yeah, this is where I have a lot of fun, both in the day job when me and Angie get to work, and also just in general. I'm traveling around with a microscope quite often, but it's very good to teach and to understand that we're walking on a universe with every step that we take in terms of the soil. I'm missing the caption here, but when you take 1 acre of soil, just like 1 square acre, you'll see that it's about 1 billion grams, just that top layer of soil. And if you were to take 1 teaspoon of that, that 1 teaspoon could contain up to 1 billion bacteria and up to 1 million fungi. So that is just mind blowing all on its own. So that's 1 teaspoon out of that 1 billion that's right there in that 1 acre. You explode that out to the size of the earth, and it is mind boggling. On top of that, you consider that 1 acre. That 1 acre could contain 1 to 5 million earthworms. It'll contain all these other micro arthropods, all these other nematodes, little burying moles, and there's like bird nests and native bees that are burrowing in there. And it is all important to the entire system because they're cycling nutrients, they're feeding on not just the minerals and releasing those minerals for roots and for plants to uptake, but they're also cycling like the dead carcasses and bodies, and the plants themselves, they're feeding back into these communities and these animals, including ourselves. They're capturing all that energy from the sun and releasing it back as sugars, releasing it back as medicines. And it's just this incredible exchange. And when you come in with this mindset of big agriculture or like industrialized agriculture or profit driven agriculture, you'll either forget about these systems or you'll start to target and eliminate them because, again, you think that some of them are nuisances. And when you have like a problem with crickets or grasshoppers and you think, I'm going to use herbicide, you're now killing off all these spiders, you're killing off ladybugs, you're killing off all these other beneficial creatures just to target that one quote unquote pest. Whereas having a robust soil food system, a soil food web, would have eliminated it on its own for the benefit of everybody. On top of all that, there's just this need to understand that the plants are sharing nutrients through mycorrhizal networks and exchanges, and they're also gaining water from deeper wells than if it was just the plants and roots on their own. Those mycelium are able to extend the roots of the plants up to 1,000 times, so you actually get much more resistant plants and environments and agroecology by having these networks in coordination and in tandem. And to bring this back to some TEK, it's pretty interesting. Like for Navajo Nation, like when we get corn smut or the corn fungus on our corn, we don't generally eat it. I'm sure some people probably did, but you go down to Mexico and like Mexico City, these other areas, and it's called huitlacoche, that they're actually eating this corn smut. And my wife, she's a plant pathologist. She brings up this incredible point that like they were growing corn at a huge density, like just huge density in order to power these different cities and like the huge civilizations down there. So of course they would be susceptible to this corn smut and to this corn fungus. And if any one of them had thought like, oh, we got to kill this and apply a fungicide, the civilization would have collapsed. Somebody was just like, oh, this is actually tasty, edible. Let's make tacos out of this. And it's just like, just a different way of thinking about how to deal with these problems that we have in agriculture, rather than seeking absolute destruction. Is like, oh, how can we actually incorporate this or think about this a different way? So it goes beyond just these organisms into things like weeds, where it's like, is that dandelion really a weed, or is it like another food source for my chickens or for myself, or is there a way that I can work with it so that I can reduce the impact of like these noxious weeds? Things like that really start to play in control. So I just love this slide. I love the soil food web. If you're able to learn more from Elaine Ingham and from that whole school, it's pretty amazing and really mind blowing. So yeah. Next slide. So these systems are just so profound. This is a great model from a physics paper from a couple of years ago, but the relationship between predator and prey is really unique to that entire soil ecosystem. The soil function to the environment. A mountain lion that hunts a deer, it ends up feeding the entire like ground around it, and through like the deer's blood and through the bones and through the different minerals that are released, it actually stimulates new growth of those plants. Not only that, but the deer and the bison, cows, goats themselves, whenever they eat grass, they're stimulating that grass not to completely die in a natural sense when nature's in full control, but stimulate more of the plant from both the root from the plant tips and then also the root shoots. They're able to become stronger and dig deeper into the earth when they're stimulated in that way. So there's this natural cycle to the entire planet that has to be considered. And it's really that comes down into really successful TEK. It's really mimicking and being able to biomimic the flows of nature and aspects of that. And you look at that, like all the wildebeest in Africa, you just think about the Americas and all the records from like Lewis and Clark, just millions and millions of buffalo, bison. You reverse the clock to 10,000, 15,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, millions of mammoths and woolly rhinoceros and horses, camels, all sorts of animals. And you start to get this understanding that, oh, there's so much yield and so much potential in our land. And this is all done without any agrochemicals. This is all done just from the relationship of the sun with the plants and through these natural cycles. There's a lot of really interesting things when we really reverse back this clock and think about the context of where all of these food systems really come from on the Americas, and that's really its own video topic on its own. So I'll save that for the future. But yeah, next slide.
So Nick touched on a little bit of some of these, but here are some examples how traditional management practices can be transferred to gardens, agroforestry, community agriculture, and large-scale agriculture alike. Traditional practices often provide more important information about management of the land than actually of BMPs that are based on colonial science. This applies not only to traditional foods, but this knowledge of the environment and observing our environment and watching the cues in our environment applies to when a plant or a backyard garden farm or community agriculture. So, for example, commercial agriculture has folks harvesting early in the morning just because it's easier, for their production and people to get off earlier in the afternoon. However, traditional berry picking happens at the end of the day because after a full day of photosynthesis, plants actually have a higher sugar and nutritional content. So following that traditional knowledge would actually improve the nutritional content of that food. And that could work for carrots, garlic, kale, etc. Other examples are coppicing willow creates healthier plants. So the key principles are to mimic nature and to promote ecological function, the health of the ecosystem, and working with natural rhythms, rather than working to destroy or to overtake for profits. Next slide.
So yeah, when we consider TEK, like there's one way of looking at it, like, oh, it's very archaeological. This was happening thousands of years ago, but it's happening even to this day. So it's important to consider what things could look like in the future. Just the way that everybody on the planet, everybody in the Americas can really start living in a way that's much more beneficial for the environment, for our communities, our own neighborhoods, and each other as relatives. There's exciting things that can be considered. One of them that I've been able to learn about and receive a few trainings on is a concept of virtual fence. Virtual fence, it's a method of using like pretty much those electric dog collars, but you have it on cattle, you have them on goats. They don't really work on sheep, so they are coming up with other technology that allows for like ear tags, things like that. But they allow for a farmer, for a rancher, for a land manager to draw fences that no longer need physical boundaries and physical barriers. Those physical barriers are, of course, labor intensive. They cost a lot of money, but they're also impacting the actual migrations, the actual movements of wild animals and animals that aren't under domestic management. So if we had more of these virtual fences around, we could start improving the environment on that one level. For like if we think about a uh, truly repaired ecosystem, like we'd be using interesting technologies like this, but we would have a return of buffalo, bison, of our native food sources entirely, the ones that are present for thousands of years with human input and management, especially the Native American management. But these are interesting technologies that can be considered. And then it's not that big of a stretch to consider having the agroforest um, re-implemented and implemented, and especially through native management, native sovereignty, and just the entire ethos and methods of traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous science at play in these systems. It gets a little bit worrisome to think that like people are trying to like take from us as they have for centuries again, and like it's not stopping anytime soon. But it's almost like trying to pick like this knowledge before it's gone forever. But it's like, oh no, there's this resilience that has to also be understood, and like these systems have to like continue operating. It's just a matter of yeah, it's a really tricky matter on many levels when you really get down to think about it. Yeah, there's also incredible technologies to think about, like agrivoltaics, that's combining renewable energy along with agricultural systems, and really just thinking about ways that impact Earth on these micro to macro to global scales. And yeah, it's very unique, and each one of us has a role to play in this. Like we're all able to make positive impacts and also negative impacts on the soils all around us, whether we're living in huge homes or ranches, or if we have like an apartment, we have native plants and flowers that we're able to make there in little pots, and little sections where we're able to. So yeah, there's a big future to think about. Next slide.
So I would be amiss if I would not talk about some of the issues with sharing traditional ecological knowledge. So many of our best management practices and regenerative agricultural practices today actually borrow or steal from traditional ecological knowledge without crediting it. This exploitation and theft of Native communities' information and resources have left an indelible mark, which must be approached with careful consideration and allowance of Indigenous oversight to sensitive material and intellectual property. There are a lot of things that many tribes or groups or Indigenous people are not willing to share, and that's completely understandable. And we have to be careful with the information that we do share. The history of theft and destruction is the reason why the publication of the guidelines for considering traditional ecological knowledge and climate change initiatives was developed for protection. So you can look that up online, and it's a large document. And it gives consideration around how communities can actually work with traditional ecological knowledge with putting Indigenous people first and giving them credit for it. And ways that permaculture steals from Indigenous practices without crediting. Just some examples are composting, intercropping, biochar, food forests. All of those are colonial terms for practices that have been happening for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, that are new ideas that are being sold and marketed. Corporations and businesses, individuals patent Indigenous phrases and medicines, both locally and recently. One example, I know that a lot of folks on this call are from Louisiana, and one of the Indigenous medicines of Louisiana is Monglier. A lot of us use that medicine. Recently, a company, and I don't mind naming them publicly, Blackbird Botanica has actually submitted a trademark name for the word Monglier to use for their cough drops, their tea, their coffee and tea-based products, their herbs, gummies, etc. So no one else can actually use the name of that plant other than them to sell that product. So that's a way that Indigenous death is still happening to this day. Next slide. Traditional medicines from around the world constitute the majority of our pharmaceutical drugs. Nick, I know Nick put the slide in the presentation, but my background prior to my current role was actually a clinical trials research nurse for almost 25 years. And in that role, I learned that 90% of our pharmaceuticals that we use today were actually derived from plant medicines. Medicines and medicinal procedures are disregarded. Um, Sorry, that popped up and it left my view. Are disregarded with regards to powerful substances, such as psilocybin and peyote, even tobacco were used for traditional practices and ceremonies, and those are co-opted and abused. So Nick, I don't know if you want to say any more about this slide. I had to jump in and
Oh no,
talk about this one too.
that was perfect, Angie. It's a big graphic there. We don't need to go into it in detail, and that was exactly what needed to be said.
So next slide.
Mhm. Yeah, so this is just to kind of round us out. I know it'd be great to have a good section for questions, but just in terms of like the knowledge, it goes beyond just like STEM kind of focuses. I studied physics. I have my degree in physics and material science and engineering, but there's a lot of art and design that goes into everything that we do as humans, of course. But one that stands out to me and that paints a really interesting and, to me, optimistic future comes through this incredible connection that I didn't even know about until like 5 6 years ago, and that the first semiconductor factory on the planet was actually located in Shiprock, New Mexico. It was right there on the Navajo Nation, and it was staffed primarily by Navajo and Hopi women, along with all these like engineers and physicists from Fairchild Semiconductor, and a lot of them went on to make Intel and these other big names that we know today. And it wasn't until 1971 where the integrated circuit was actually developed in a commercial sense. Um, the Fairchild Semiconductor in Shiprock was established in 1965, and in that time, either of those engineers were just really inspired by the Southwest and by the art, but they were like working closely with these women and these tech workers, and I'm sure that there was some influence there that brought about like this geometry and considerations that we now use today in like our billion billion transistor processors, and like now these supercomputer processors that we can actually purchase from like Best Buy and other places now. So it's really interesting to consider that there's like indigenous design and science at the heart of the 21st century and the technology that we have today. Next slide. And that's a great article to read about, following through the presentation and or Google. So yeah, just that optimistic sense is all these computing and all of our food, all of this is coming from the earth. Like those silicon chips, they're refined sand. There's a beautiful story there as well. But all of this can paint a future that is just really amazing for biodiversity and for curiosity on the planet and in the solar system. So I have my fingers crossed that the AI, and as it develops more and more, they're going to understand that these connections of microbiota that constitute our microbiomes and like our soil systems are just as important as like the macro ecology that's at work on the planet, and the robots will go to work fixing and assisting the planet rather than where it is right now, where it's really resource intensive to even use like these. It's not true AI yet, but like these large language models and everything like that. So that's how I wanted to conclude things on my end. But like if you could imagine like a food forest in which like a drone is able to go through and like pick food that's like really nutritious for humans, but then also like for the other animals that might be living a whole different life, because that computing and machines is going to it potentially could change everything at a really fundamental and crazy level. So yeah, thank you, Angie, for letting me put.
No worries. Next slide. So a big Mado, which is thank you, and Muskogee. Nick, I don't know how you say Mado and Danae, but
Yeah.
thank you guys for listening. And we could both talk about this for days and days and days. So I appreciate you guys being here with us today. This is our contact information if you would ever like to connect more about any of the above topics or traditional ecological knowledge. And I know we're just about out of time, but I don't know if I'm willing to stay on for questions if
Me
folks
too.
are
Me
able
too.
to. So. I don't know if anybody in the audience has questions,
Yeah,
but
any comments, any questions?
thank you all very much.
Yeah. Angie, we're going to have to focus in on some medicinal things. I have a really great colleague who looks at geomedicine, geological medicine, and it gets really crazy. So,
I could go deep, deep on the medicine. That's yeah. And this is such a huge topic. It's really difficult to like narrow into an hour. Especially, if we're just trying to give overviews of how like traditional ecological knowledge can affect like how we interact with our daily environment, with agriculture and our agricultural systems, how how we can work to combat climate change and taking that knowledge and continue into the future. I did see someone ask if we have any favorite resources. Unfortunately, I don't know how it is for Nick, but unfortunately, in the Southeast, a lot of information has been lost due to colonization. So my most valuable and treasured and true resource is actually elders, spending time with elders and learning from them, and asking them questions and actually nature itself, and observing nature. So Nick, I don't know if you have an answer.
yeah, no, definitely on a lot of the case side is listening and learning from the communities. We have a lot of privilege in Navajo Nation for different resources like this that have been like culturally and community and held on. I can't write it down because it won't be the same at all. The other sources that I love to point people to in a general sense are, of course, the Soil Food Web School, and then there's a great book called On Forgotten Fires. Forgotten Fires. It's by Omer C. Stewart. He looks at burning throughout the entire United States in an archaeological and historical context from coast to coast, and does a really good job on that. He wrote it in the 50s, but it's got a really interesting history itself. But that's a really good introduction to a lot of food forests from a non-native sense. But he writes with a lot of care, and there's like little to zero racism. It's pretty much just in the sources that he's drawing from. He himself, as a person, you can tell, has a lot of care and respect for Native people. So that's the other thing, is that you want to find those sources that have that respect and that mutual understanding, rather than like, oh, we're on from up high and we're like looking down at what these people were doing. Really, it's like, oh, like how can we learn and live with each other? So those are my sources. Yeah,
And actually
nothing like stories from the community.
thinking about like written book, like things that help bring me to this path and like further into the path that I'm on now. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of the book Braiding Sweetgrass, but I think the reason why that book was so profound for me is because it gives you a story of like this plant is not just a food. Like this is a
Mhm.
story about this plant and why like its own looking at these entities as like actual living beings completely changes your worldview and how you would interact with your environment and with agriculture on a whole. And I think that that's a large part of traditional ecological knowledge is looking at the big picture, and humans are just a small fragment of that big picture. And I think that's a key part of it. Also for the Southeast, there's a book called Choctaw Food. And that talks about Choctaw food, but our foods are medicine. Our foods are part of our agriculture and our environment and our ecosystems. And so that book delves into how they prepared the food, how they grew the food, how they interacted with that food, and it's very Southeast centric, even though it's specifically written from a Choctaw lens. Almost all of the tribes in the Southeast ate the same food because we ate from our environment. So
Yeah, the recording, this presentation is recorded, so happy for it to be shared out. And yeah. In terms of one of the questions on like ceremony and medicinals, it really depends on the ceremony. There's many different kinds, and it'll vary based on where you're at. I'd say like one really cool one to always look into is sweat lodge, sweat ceremonies. Those ones are just incredible on so many levels. there's like lots of researchers who look at it. Like there's Huberman and like other people who are like really focused in on like what heat does for the body and has this unique relationship because on our skin we have archaea and archaea they evolved in like these thermal heat vents. They live in these like completely different heat senses that than we do as a macroorganism. But we also have heat shock proteins, things like that. So it's heating is really interesting on its own, but in a native sense, and when you look at like the sweat lodge, whichever way that you look at it, like there's the introduction of like willow, you know, like when you're looking at Inipi Lakota style, or like introduction of these other medicinal herbal medicines and things that might be burned or that are in the presence of that ceremony. It has this layer of medicinal um, just effect that is magnified that is really really fascinating. And then like there's the psychological component. Anybody that is familiar or has done sweat lodge, like there's something that you just can't get out of just doing like a sauna or like just a run of the mill like steam room or anything like that. There's a really really deep connection, not just with the earth, but with the people that you're with. You know, so like there's something that they haven't really tapped on in a laboratory clinical sense. But that's just my general way of saying it. If you talk with like a medicine person on Navajo Nation, we call them Hitatli, they'd be able to share a layer that's even beyond what I'm talking about. There's actually a few other areas that I'd love to share on, but I know that we're running on different time. I'm also just happy to stay on and keep talking too. So
Yeah. Any other burning questions? And then I'll leave it up to Maggie and Hannah on how long we can keep rambling. Yeah.
yeah, if you don't mind, I will share it super quick then. So, like being on the West Coast, like white sage, everybody wants white sage all around the world. They're just like harvesting it, poaching it, like killing all these ancient stands. Like white sage on its own, when it's burned or used as a tea, it's very medicinal. What people are missing is that medicinal aspect gets kicked up another layer when you actually plant the seed, when you introduce like your sweat, when you introduce your saliva and your being with that plant, it starts to become a medicine that's tuned towards you. So that layer of health and healing actually reaches another level. It's not just like viruses and pathogens and like giving life to like other good microorganisms on your body. It's like doing that specifically for you. And then what people again lose out on is that when your family's been going to that plant for hundreds of years, for generations, now it's this unique medicine for you and for your entire family, and it's at another layer of healing and potency that is very hard to describe. So just had to, yeah, had to get that out of me.
Awesome. Y'all, thank you so much. Your enthusiasm is totally infectious, and I'm so grateful that I get to work alongside both of you. It's so great. Um, I think there's no more questions in the chat or coming up, so I think we'll wrap here. And I just also wanted to mention that we have some additional programming coming up tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Central Time. We're having a session called Changing Crops and Honoring Origins with Stephanie Elwood and Miss Mila Berhan from Southern University's Ag Center. They co-authored a guide called the Ethnic Vegetable Planting Guide, and they're going to dive into that. So totally recommend it. It's free programming. And then I'm also going to mention an in-person session we're going to be having on Sunday, May 18th in Abbeville, Louisiana, at the Acadiana Growers Alliance Machine Shop and Repair Center. This is going to be small engine repair and maintenance. And I just wanted to also mention that all of this programming, one, it's free, and two, it is co-programming with our Louisiana CRAFT network. So CRAFT stands for the Collaborative Regional Alliance of Farmer Training. And it's a nationwide model, but which we brought to Louisiana, and it is a peer-to-peer knowledge sharing network. And so these are some of the things that are coming, that will be coming up as part of CRAFT. And I also want to mention that it's supported in part by the USDA's TOPP program, so Transition to Organic Partnership Program. If you or anyone you know is considering transitioning to organic, we have some resources to support you. And yeah, we hope that you'll join us for some um, more programs coming up this spring. And thanks y'all for being here tonight. We'll wrap it there.
Thanks,
Bye, y'all.
everybody. Have a good night.